Hey, what's up? This is Mr. Burden, and I am in the week 13 folder. The purpose of this video is because I am taking a personal day on Monday, December 3rd, so there's not going to be a live e-session. So this is meant to essentially replace the live e-session, and I'm going to go over everything you need to know to set you up for success on the week 13 assignments. So where I'm really going to focus on, because for week 13 I have links that the former teacher had on how to do the keystrokes, so I'm not really going to focus on that as much in here. Also, we have you have a time test. Again, not going to focus as much there because that's pretty straightforward. You know how to do that by now. Where I'm going to focus more on is right here, is how to complete this week 13 email formative. So I'm just going to go ahead and start by reading the directions. So first, please rewatch the emailing video that I sent out earlier this semester. Many of the formatting rules and guidelines to writing a professional email are covered in that video. Since I go over how to properly format an email in that video, I'm not going to spend as much time doing that in this week's e-sessions. This week's e-session is meant to build off that initial video. Okay, so I want you to click here, watch this video right here. I show you how to format everything right in here. And again, I don't like to, since I do it here, it didn't really make sense to go ahead and repeat myself again. So just watch this video. You can see it's about 6 minutes long. So do that first. Now I'm going to go into read this next part. So after you watch that video, I wrote, I truly can't tell you the number of times I see adults in a professional workplace setting write emails that don't give the professional impression they're aiming for. In this week's e-session, which you're watching right now, I'm going to go more in depth on writing a professional email. What are common mistakes people make? What can you do to make sure you give a professional email impression that you intend to? So essentially what I'm trying to say is, how do you make sure you give the professional impression that you want to when you write an email? To find out, watch the week 13 e-session by clicking here. There's no link yet because I'm recording it right now, but if you're watching this, the link is actually there. So I am going to go ahead and I'm just going to make my presentation here. So this is an e-session that is all about emailing. So here is some setup stuff. Make sure that you double space between each part or section of the email. So I show you that in my emailing video. What I mean is, one section would be the salutation or the greeting, then the next part is the body. Make sure you double space in between those sections. Make sure you have a professional, easy to remember email address. So maybe having the email address I'm so fly all the time 5743@gmail.com was really fun when you were in middle school, or maybe it's kind of fun to send your friends or something along those lines from that email address. Definitely make something more professional that you can use for like school and eventually work purposes. You're getting to the point where, if you haven't already, you're going to be making resumes where you email people for professional purposes, or and you put your email address on the resume or on a college application or something along those lines. MaryJackson@gmail.com, it gives a much more professional email address than I'm so fly all the time. Okay, so make sure that you have a good email address. Oftentimes, honestly, your name can be good. If that's taken, you can do a little bit of a different variation of that. But pick something that's easy to remember too, because then if you tell someone it, they can remember it. So oftentimes what sometimes I see is, people like to be unique, and I think being unique is an awesome thing. However, sometimes in email, people take it a little bit too far. They like to choose their own font style. Okay, if you look at these different font styles, one didn't actually show up in Google Slides, it changed. This third one, and actually the first one, it changed when I converted this into a Google slide, are very easy to read. Okay, it's straightforward. Sure, does that last one, Dear Jane, and the cursive, and that second one, is that is that unique? Well, yeah, but I don't want to read 3 paragraphs in an email using this. It's harder to read as the recipient, as the receiver of the email, to go ahead and try and decipher an email. When someone uses a font like that, and if we're being honest with how it works, if someone gets an email in a hard to read font, they're probably not going to read it all that closely. They might, okay, but I think a lot of people would just kind of scan through it, see if they could look for the main point. So just make sure you pick something that's as easy to read as possible. All right, make sure, I do talk about this a little bit in the video, so I'll just briefly overview this. Subject line is very underrated. Have a good subject line. Make sure what you want is for the receiver of the email to know what the topic of the email is about before they even open it. For instance, this last one where, if this was from a student, sometimes students will just they'll put in the subject assignment. Okay, well, what assignment? Like, what about it? But then you compare it to this very last one, which is the good one. You say question on T3 volunteer opportunity assignment. Now right away, before I even open up the email, I have what that assignment is in my head. I know what it's about. So I'm in the right mind frame as the recipient going into the person's email. Salutation greeting. Remember to use a good one. So a more formal one would be like, one that you don't know the person personally as well, would be like Dear Mr. Reed or Ms. Reed. You typically, when you are addressing a female, there are 2 options. There are what I have here, Ms. Reed, so MS, and then, period Reed. Use that if the person is single or if you're not sure if they are married or not. So if you're not certain that they are married or they are single, use the Ms. If you know for a fact that they are married, it's appropriate to do Mrs., which is abbreviated MRS, period, space Reed, okay? So that stands for Mrs. Again, if you are not sure, use this Ms. right here. The reason behind that is because, imagine put yourself in their position. Imagine that you are a female and that you are not married, and you get an email from someone that's addressing you like you're married. Some people, that's just going to rub the wrong way. So if you're unsure, just put the Ms. You're not going to insult someone if you put the MS period. But you could if you go MRS, because then you're just like assuming they're married, and some people aren't, and so they aren't going to necessarily appreciate being addressed in that way. So the safe way is to just do the MS. Typically people aren't going to be insulted by that, and that's just etiquette in our society. Is you go ahead, if you're unsure, you just put MS, so no one's going to get upset about that. But then, so informally, again, so if you know the person a little bit better, so for instance, if I'm emailing one of my colleagues, and I talk to them with their first name, I can go ahead and do that. If I was emailing one of my buddies, of course, it could even be more informal than that, like, hey, what's going on, Chad, or something along those lines. So just consider, who your recipient is, who's receiving your email. If the person doesn't know you, make sure you introduce yourself immediately, right off the bat. So if I'm emailing someone that doesn't know me and it's like a work purpose, say, hi, and then whoever, and then the body, I would say, my name is Michael Burden, business and marketing teacher at eAchieve Academy. Okay, so right off the bat, they know who I am. They don't have to scroll to the bottom. They don't have to try and like figure it out throughout the email. It's good to also be polite and direct. So it's kind of like a fine balance here, and this also ties in with the last bullet point. You want to be concise, the point, and brief, yet you don't want your email to come off as like curt or rude. So be polite as possible, but also be as concise as possible. Find that nice balance. Remember, people can't see your facial expression. They can't hear your tone of voice over email. So it's really important that you take extra care to really try and be as polite as possible. When you're deciding what order to put information in, you almost always want to put the most important information that's in your email at the beginning. Reason being is because if you put unimportant information at the beginning, some people are just going to read that. They're going to decide this email isn't that important, and then they either scan the rest of it or they just don't read it at all, or thoroughly, or anything along those lines. But if the person sees right away, like, oh, this isn't important. Typically, readers, always at least read the first part. And just kind of prioritize that information. Start off with the most important and go from there. Avoid slang, profanity, and emojis, okay? We'll start with profanity here. So remember, as soon as you press that send button, you no longer have control of that message. It's out there. The other person has it. They can save it. They can copy it. They can forward it. They can do whatever they want with it. So it's always better to err on the safe side when it comes to that stuff. I mean, even if you have a good relationship with that person now, you don't know what could change in the future, and you can't really accurately predict that. So it's always important that to understand that once you press that send message, now it's out there. So be real careful about using profanity or something along those lines. Emojis you can use, but just make sure you use it sparingly. Don't overdo it. Consider your recipient. If I know someone pretty well, and they know me, I might use an emoji or something along those lines. But it's if I'm emailing, our superintendent, I'm not going to put an emoji in there. It just doesn't get all that professional. I don't, know the superintendent as well, so I wouldn't do that. Slang, kind of avoid too. Again, people don't hear your tone. Things can be misinterpreted. So I've been talking about tone quite a bit. I'll just kind of build off this. One way to make sure that you use the proper tone is to read it aloud to yourself before you press send. Okay, so if I'm sending a pretty important email to someone that doesn't know me as well, I'll read it aloud. And that really helps, because sometimes if you're just like typing and writing, it might sound good in your head, but when you say it aloud, you might realize that, it's maybe coming off as a little bit rude. Be very cautious with jokes, building off this idea. People can't see your face. They can't hear your voice. Jokes can be easily misinterpreted in email. So just be very careful. Again, all these things are like not absolutes, like, oh, you can never send a joke in an email. I'm not saying that. Just err with caution, because of what I've already talked about. No one wants to read a paragraph that's like 15, 20 sentences. If you're probably writing a paragraph that long, it can probably be broken up into different paragraphs. So arrange it by topic or idea, and kind of use your own judgment when it makes sense to have another paragraph, because reading like this huge thing is often hard on someone's eyes a little bit. And to be honest, when they see a long paragraph, a lot of people will kind of scan over some of that stuff. Keep excuse me, keep out any confidential information. So again, same idea as far as once you press send, you lose control. Don't put account numbers or passwords or anything private in your emails. Avoid all caps. Just like when you receive a text message in all caps, it's a similar effect through email. It often feels like someone's yelling at you or screaming at you, or they're mad. So don't do that. Again, not to say there's never a time where you can use all caps. Sometimes I'll do so if I want to emphasize a certain word. I'm just very conscious when I use it to make sure that I'm not giving off this impression that I'm mad. It can be a good way to like highlight a certain word or make it stand out. Again, just be careful with it. This is a really common one. Don't overuse exclamation points. So for instance, you might say, hi Nicole, I'm doing great today. I had a hamburger for lunch. I'm gonna go pick up the kids after school. And people just keep putting exclamation points in. Are you really that excited that you had a burger for lunch? Maybe you are. And A burger kind of sounds, pretty delicious to me right now, but I'm just joking. But you know what I mean. So it's okay to use exclamation points, just don't overdo it. All right, font tools, use them effectively. So I'm talking about like bolding, underlining, italics. Um, I will get emails where adults don't follow these rules. Meaning, what they do is they'll literally bold the entire email. Okay, so the entire email is in bold. Well, that's not the point of bold. The point of bold or underline or italics is to make something stand out. If you bold everything, nothing stands out, right? Like, it's not like because you bolded your email that it's more likely that I'm going to read it or something along those lines. If anything, you just made it a little bit harder on my eyes to read because you've bolded everything. I see this, honestly, this is a really common thing that I see with adults. They'll just overdo using these different tools, and now nothing stands out because everything has some sort of underline or bold or italics or different text color or all caps, and now the email is just like hard to read and it's almost too much. So use them, but just don't overdo it. Next thing, use a numbered or bulleted list to organize information. This is a huge thing that gets underutilized a ton by adults. So for instance, if you have 3 questions, like let's say you have 3 questions that you want to ask someone, okay? Rather than putting the 3 questions in a paragraph, a great way to do it, it'd be like, I have 3 questions about, and you say what it's about, then you put a colon, and then you press enter, and then you make a numbered list, 1, 2, 3, and you put your questions, in that nice order, that numbered order where it's really easy for the recipient to read it. They're not going to miss your question. You're more likely to get it answered versus, sometimes people throw, multiple questions in the middle of a paragraph. Well, it's easy for the receiver to accidentally miss one of your questions or forget to address it. So use numbered lists or bulleted lists depending on what you're trying to do to go ahead and organize information. It's super helpful. I find that I get much better responses from people if like I'm inquiring about something when I do this type of thing. All right, another one would be like an agenda, like, oh, here is what we discussed in today's meeting, and you make like, 5 bullet points. Okay, that's a lot better than writing these big long paragraph. All right, closing signature. Make sure to consider, your relationship with the person, with the receiver, what makes the most sense here. It's always good to include it. I think it's always good to also, type your name. I go over this in the emailing video, so I'm not gonna talk much about this because I don't want to be repetitive. Some other things to do, proofread. Okay, I know people always tell you to proofread, but it's really important. A great way to not give a professional impression is to not proofread and then have a bunch of spelling and grammatical errors. So make sure to take that extra step, take that time, proofread it over. Reading aloud is super helpful with that. I do that quite a bit, especially if it's like a pretty important email. Like let's say I'm emailing a parent or something. I don't want to give off a unprofessional impression. So one of the things I try and do is I'll try and read it aloud to myself, because when I read it aloud, I'm a lot more likely to catch a mistake. Don't be too repetitive. So just if 2 sentences essentially make, this, you get across the same point, delete one of them, okay? For the most part, people don't want to read like this super long email, so try not to be too repetitive, be concise. Double check that you've attached everything. So oftentimes what happens is people will press send, but they wanted to like attach an image or a file or something along those lines, and they forget to do that. So for instance, in the email, you're like, according to this this attachment, you say whatever it is, but then when you press send, you actually you forget to do the attachment. A good way around that, something I try and practice, is before I start typing the email, I'll attach like what I know I want to attach right away. That way I don't accidentally press send without attaching it, because that can, it happens, but again, you want to try and give that professional impression. Double check who's on the email thread. This is a big one, okay? If you press reply, just look, make sure, are you just replying to that person, or did you actually press reply all, where you're going to respond to every single person on that chain? I see that all the time. I've seen definitely in a professional setting, people get embarrassed because they meant to just hit reply to the person, but instead they pressed reply all, and it went to like 100 different people. And it wasn't something that they wanted to share with 100 different people. It was something they wanted to share with just that person that they sent. So be really careful about that when are you pressing reply or reply all, and check who's on the email thread. I show how to do these things in my emailing video, so I'm not going to do this here. The only one that I don't show how to do is the vacation responder, but it's in the exact same spot. So that's like when you, so it's in the settings, like I show in the emailing video. You go to when you're in your Gmail, go to settings, and you'll see it in the video when I'm talking about it. Well, vacation responder, if you click it on, for instance, I used it last week as we had kind of a little family emergency where I had to suddenly, not where I wasn't going to be as close to my email all day. So I just wrote a thing where when I turned on my vacation responder, just explain that. It said, something along the lines of, hello, I have, a personal matter that I need to attend to. I will be, I will be checking email when I can. Thank you for your patience, as it may take me a little bit longer to respond than normal. Thank you, Mike. And so I'll turn that on. So now if you have your vacation responder on, now when someone sends you an email, they will automatically get that response. So now they're not thinking to themselves, well, why hasn't, Mike or Mr. Burden responded to me yet? They'll know right away. They'll see that it might take a little bit longer. So that can be nice. The only thing is you have to remember to turn it off when you're done. So that can happen to people too, is like all of a sudden it's the next day and they're halfway through their day, and people are getting automatic replies when just because they forgot to turn that off. So make sure you turn that off. All right, I'm going to go ahead and jump back into the directions here. I do have a couple other resources right in this folder. This is so you hear other people's perspectives beyond mine. So again, just some extra things about how to write a good email and write a professional one and things along those lines. Now, to complete this email formative, you've already watched this, you've done the emailing video, and you can see, speaking of proofreading, I got to get rid of that I. I'll have that done by the time you watch this. What you're going to do is you're going to email me an invitation to an event you're planning to host. So you can choose the event, just keep it professional. Please be sure to include all essential information, who, what, where, when, why, how, and include all parts of the email when you send it. So what I mean by that professional, by the who, what, where, when, how. So sometimes people, let's say in this case it's an event, they'll invite, send out this invite to an event, but they won't put the address, or they won't put the date, or they won't put the time, or they won't put like when they have to RSVP or get back to the person, or how to RSVP. So make sure that ask yourself before you press send, did I answer the who, what, where, when, why, how? Then you're going to send me that email, and I'm going to evaluate you based on how well you follow, all these email etiquette rules and guidelines that we've talked about in this week's eSession. And then what I want you to do is to go in here, go to the right submission box. So this is after you pressed send in the email. I want you to write whatever you wrote in the subject. Write what you wrote in the subject line here. Press enter. Then write the date. So let's say it was today. And the time you sent the email. do that because I'm going to be getting a ton of emails from students, because there's a lot of people in the class. And so if I see it's one of these assignments, I'm typically going to kind of like set it to the side and not read it right away. But then when I go in to do a bunch of grading for keyboarding, I'm going to search for your email and I'm going to search for it right here, because if I was I'm not going to email you back. What I'm going to do is I'm going to write feedback on how you did through Blackboard. So, and then you just go ahead and press submit. So with that being said, I think we're all set here for week 13. Good luck on these assessments. We're going to build off this for next week, so make sure to check the feedback, and thank you so much for watching. Have a good one. Take care. Bye.